Well, it's that time of year again. Time for ghost stories and such. The South is full of ghost stories, lots of them. More than most of the ones in New England, you might say. Why, we have tales down here from the swamps that would rival anything that the Headless Horseman ever could have cooked up himself. The most peculiar of which I will now regale to you is that of a Miss Arabella Webbliss. Now I know what you're going to ask, and yes, Arabella Webbliss was from the Webblisses of Pelham County. Born with a silver spoon in her mouth, the only troubles in her life she would ever have to look forward to would be to find a suitable decoration for her hair when the magnolia blossoms would wither in the harsh winter. Now, of course, there would be other complications as well, finding a suitor, growing up being the apple of Mama and Daddy's eye, dealing with tears from disappointments, from birthday parties where the tablecloth was the wrong color, or the servants wouldn't give her exactly what she wanted to eat in the middle of the night. But Arabella was otherwise born to a suitable and wonderful home for any child. The strange and unusual attribute that was stricken with Arabella practically from the time she was born on can only be explained by the fact that the devil himself must have been hard at work from the time she was a twinkle in her daddy's eye. "My babe is blind! My babe is blind!" Wisteria Webbliss wept and wailed up and down the hallways of the antebellum mansion. Cornelius, Wisteria's husband and Arabella's father, was left to talk to the doctor in the room alone when their child had had her most recent check-up at 6 years old, and it was explained to them why Arabella had been so strange and complacent as an infant and a toddler. "She'll see shapes, Mr. Webbliss," the doctor explained. "Shapes, but nothing else. Nothing substantial, you understand?" Cornelius nodded his head, and he touched the soft, beautiful blonde curls on Arabella's head, knowing that now would be a terrible and hard time for their family. To be stricken with an invalid child, it would be a mark in the community, to say for certain, but now Arabella was doomed to a life without a suitor, doomed to watch her parents, or rather, not watch her parents, throwing magnificent parties, socializing with family, and waiting for the harvest to come in. But at least, God had blessed them with provisions to take care of such an invalid. And Cornelius did thank God that night for his money and his slaves. While Arabella rested in her bed, one of the servants, the favorite servant, rested in her own bed as well. Of course, she was thinking about something else, something a little more dark, because, as I said before, the devil had been hard at work since Arabella had been a twinkle in her daddy's eye. And just as God moves in mysterious ways, the devil moves in clear, obvious ways in some very, very discreet people. Delilah was the favorite slave of the Wisteria Webbliss family, especially Wisteria herself, for obvious reasons. Delilah had a kind and soothing nature that cloaked her as wonderfully as the lovely clothes she tended but was never allowed to wear. Delilah had come into the service of the Webbliss family a mere 7 years before the birth of Arabella, and the man that had sold Delilah to them had warned them at first that the girl had not been for sale, and that she had a strangeness to her. The tradesmen claimed that she had been some level of importance in the heathen practices from her family, who had been severely punished and removed from their most recent residence for continuing their juju in secret while living on the plantation, somewhere in Virginia, I think. Wisteria insisted, and Cornelius was in desperate need of a housekeeper for his wife, since they had recently decided to start the process of expanding their family. Delilah had the smoothest complexion, clearest gray eyes, and loveliest smile that Wisteria had ever seen on a slave for sale. From the time she had arrived at the Webblisses' home, Delilah had instantly won the hearts of all the guests at the plantation, and earned a place of comfort almost constantly at the side of the lady of the house. A place, one might realize, that allowed her to be close enough to all of the comforts of a wealthy family, but too far out of reach, given her ethnic situation. Shame, really, when you think about it. Why, it might almost be said that had the family been honest and caring about Delilah as a human being, Delilah might not have gone through with the plan, or gone through with it elsewhere, and no one would have been harmed at all. Sadly, the pride of the South was in well-kept homes and comforted wives, which came at the price of human dignity and innate freedom for those unfortunate enough to find themselves in the same situation as Delilah. It was no surprise, though, that Delilah also found her way into the heart of the fair Arabella, loving the child as if it were the fruit of her own tender womb. Little changed after the discovery of Arabella's blindness between Delilah and the girl, which made this relationship the only one unmarred by the child's misfortune. Delilah would still play, groom, and sing to the girl as always. The very night after the announcement, Delilah sat with Arabella in her brass-framed chair in front of the enormous vanity table in her room, running a brush through the girl's thick blonde curls. Arabella stared blankly into the large mirror, unaware of the gray eyes glowing in Delilah's expression as she brushed the girl's hair. Delilah felt fate twisting under her fingertips, just like the girl's hair, and knew that if she didn't act quickly, the modicum of happiness she experienced in the mansion would be very short-lived indeed. She leaned forward and turned the mirror so that its back faced her blank and ready. She placed a piece of chalk in Arabella's hand, and guiding it, drew just the right symbols as she spoke in her native tongue. Fair you are of hair and skin, condemned without, contract within. Obedient be to my desire, and magic will follow as time transpires. Powers of the spirit's mind will shift these flaws in your design. Year upon year, and you shall see, and I shall have what's owed to me. It's a miracle! God be praised, my baby's being made whole! Wisteria shouted for joy up and down the hallways of the antebellum mansion. Wisteria Webless wept and wailed this time for joy up and down the hallways of their antebellum mansion. Cornelius was once again left to talk to the doctor in the room, this time with both Arabella, now age 8, and Delilah, who smiled proudly. When the unexplainable befalls the wealthy, and improves their lives drastically, it is usually attributed as a gift from God, but when the same unexplainable improves the lives of the poor, strangely, it is almost always labeled as witchcraft or wiles of the devil. And while the devil might not have had the power to restore Arabella's sight, or even give Delilah courage to draw the symbols, he sure had a powerful mix of opportunity available at this summoning of darkness to reveal light. Cornelius smiled and shook the doctor's hand as the man finished packing his black bag. "She'll start seeing more and more, Mr. Webless," the doctor explained. "Seems whatever was blocking the paths to her eyes from her occipital lobe is clearing like a nice pond in April. It'll start with colors now, and then she'll be able to see details. Eventually Arabella might just have full sight and capability." Cornelius nodded his head, and he beamed with more than fatherly pride. Now dawned a new and wonderful era for the Webless family, and indeed all the Webless clan, from Pelham County all the way to the city of Sparks. Why, now that I recall this, it seems ironic and mighty funny that something so evil and hellish would have been so close to Sparks. Well, at any rate, Delilah brushed the girl's hair that night, seated in front of the mirror, and contemplated the next 8 years. Arabella would be introduced to eligible men, married off, and the future of the Webless plantation would pass on to the next generation. Delilah's grip strengthened at this thought, and then she reminded herself of the real reason for the markings on the back of the mirror. Arabella would be grateful to her, yes indeed, and she would will the plantation to her instead of any children. They would have their father's wealth after all. Couldn't see a Webless being married to anyone without money. Few more years, and Arabella would have her sight. The Weblises would have lived a full and happy life, and Delilah would finally have the home she had tended for so many years. As the years passed, the doctor's predictions and Delilah's spirits filled the house with joy and laughter. While the family was overjoyed to have their little princess as lovely and capable as any other girl, they had noticed an odd habit of hers. Arabella seemed to enjoy sitting in her bedroom rather than on the veranda. She would spend hours staring into the glass, touching her own features and loving each and every one. She had heard nearly every hour of every day from the servants, her parents, and all the relations that she was the most beautiful sight to ever grace the Weblis plantation. Delilah could recall a time, only once, mind you, that such a thing had been said about her, but it was only right that the admonition passed to the Weblis heiress. By the time her 16th birthday had rolled around, Cornelius had found a wonderful young man for Arabella, Freddie Copeland. All the girls in Pelham County knew Freddie, heir to the Copeland plantations and a true Adonis. It did bother Mr. and Mrs. Weblis that Arabella, while she appreciated Freddie's company, still preferred her mirror. The two were so perplexed that Wisteria suggested something completely silly. Now, you must understand that Mrs. Weblis hadn't suggested doing anything together for some time now, let alone something as silly and possibly offensive as this, but being always obliged to humor Wisteria, Cornelius agreed at once.